What if I told you that our modern idea of morality, the kind that praises weakness, rewards victimhood, and punishes ambition, might not be compassion at all, but control in disguise? There's a story. It's old but familiar. A village tucked in a valley surrounded by nature's quiet fury, rivers, forests, the weight of time. Life is simple, but everything hinges on one thing: a fragile, aging bridge. It connects them to the outside world. It has weathered storms, floods, seasons, but now it groans under its own age. A storm is coming, not a metaphor, a real storm. Clouds darken. The elders feel it in their bones. Something must be done. A few brave minds rise. Builders, planners, problem solvers. They speak with urgency. Let's rebuild before it's too late. They don't promise safety, just action. And then come the voices of hesitation. Quiet, cautious, sympathetic. Let's wait, they say. Let's not act out of fear. They mean well. But the storm doesn't care about intentions. It arrives, tears the bridge apart, and cuts the village off from salvation. No one can leave. Supplies dwindle. Silence spreads. Not peace, regret. This parable is more than fiction. It's the story Nietzsche warned us about. Not of physical weakness, but of spiritual decay. When hesitation masquerades as wisdom, when fear pretends to be virtue, when those unwilling to move forward start to dictate who can. Nietzsche called this slave morality. And in this story, the village didn't fall because the storm was too strong. It fell because strength was silenced. Now zoom out. Think about today. How many conversations are dominated not by those with vision, but by those who fear it? How often do we celebrate caution as intelligence and humility as moral high ground, not because they are inherently valuable, but because they are safe? How often are we told to tone it down, play it safe, not to dream too loud? We're living in the village. We're watching the bridge rot. Nietzsche saw this pattern not as a cultural quirk, but as a threat to the very spirit of humanity. When weakness is exalted not as a condition to be lifted, but as a standard by which all must shrink, we begin to collapse. Not with thunder, but with whispers. You shouldn't try too hard. Don't stand out. Be humble. They sound gentle. They feel kind, but they're slow poison. And Nietzsche wasn't just pointing fingers at others. He lived this. A man haunted by pain, sickness, isolation, misunderstood. He was not immune to suffering. He just refused to call it sacred. He never sought comfort in excuses. He sought fire, a fire that could burn through lies, through pity, through the soft, quiet rot of good intentions. And that brings us to the heart of the matter. Not everyone who hesitates is wrong. Not every soft voice is misguided. But when fear becomes policy, when caution becomes morality, when strength is rebranded as cruelty, something breaks. Not overnight, but over decades, like the bridge. So here's the hook and the challenge. In your life, in your culture, in your values, are you reinforcing the bridge or watching it crack? Because the storm will come. It always does. And when it arrives, good intentions won't hold the line. Only strength will. We've been taught to believe that protecting the vulnerable is the highest good. That to be kind is to yield, to lower our voice, to dim our light so others don't feel small in our presence. But what if that very belief system, wrapped in words like inclusivity and kindness, is actually eroding the very thing that makes us human? The will to grow, to challenge, to rise. This is what Nietzsche saw with terrifying clarity. A culture slowly turning against its own excellence, not out of malice, but out of fear disguised as virtue. He watched as societies began to sanctify suffering, not as something to overcome, but as something to wear like a badge of moral superiority. Suddenly, ambition looked like arrogance. Confidence became toxic. The strong were no longer admired but accused of pride, of greed, of insensitivity. And all of this, Nietzsche argued, wasn't happening because people were more compassionate. It was because they were more resentful. The ones who couldn't climb were now burning the mountain, and worse, they were calling it justice. You see it every day in subtle moments. A coworker scoffs at your promotion, calling it luck. A friend calls your lifestyle too much because it reminds them of dreams they abandoned. Someone criticizes your confidence, not because it's harmful, but because it exposes their insecurity. Nietzsche called this ressentiment. Not just resentment, but a deep psychological mutation. It's when someone feels powerless to rise, so they rewrite the rules to punish those who do. And here's the twist. It's not just happening out there, it's happening in you. How many times have you pulled yourself back just to fit in, held your tongue to avoid making others uncomfortable, diminished your dreams because someone else wasn't ready to hear them? If you've done any of that, and we all have, then you felt the pull of slave morality. Not a moral code born from truth or excellence, but from fear of being left behind. Nietzsche didn't hate the weak. He hated the lie. The idea that weakness is automatically good, that suffering makes someone holy, that to desire more is somehow wrong. He saw how morality had become a weapon for the timid. And once that weapon took over, strength itself became the enemy. But here's the truth no one wants to admit. Not all softness is kindness. Some of it is cowardice. Not all humility is noble. Sometimes it's just envy wrapped in politeness. And when a society starts to confuse those things, when it starts to teach people to hide their fire instead of feeding it, what you get isn't peace, you get decay. That's where Nietzsche starts to become prophetic. Because this isn't just philosophy, it's prediction. When a culture rewards helplessness and punishes greatness, when it raises up the bitter and tears down the brave, it doesn't just lose its strength, it loses its soul. Somewhere along the line, we stopped seeing greatness as a goal and started seeing it as a threat. And that shift didn't come from the strong. It came from the ones who feared they'd never measure up. Instead of rising to meet excellence, they redefined it. Instead of saying, "Let me try," they said, "Why should anyone try?" And the moment we started calling that humility, we began poisoning our potential from the inside out. Nietzsche saw this before most. He looked at the rise of organized morality, especially Christian ethics, and didn't see love or grace. He saw spiritual rebellion, a quiet revolution where those who felt powerless rebranded their fear as virtue. They didn't want to climb the mountain, so they declared the mountain evil. They couldn't beat the strong, so they called strength dangerous. And with enough voices repeating the lie, culture forgot it was a lie. What followed was a slow moral inversion. Pride became sin. Ambition became greed. Willpower became selfishness. And weakness became sacred. Not because it held wisdom, but because it gave the weak power over the strong. If you've ever witnessed someone use their pain as a shield to silence truth, or seen how fragility can be weaponized to dodge accountability, then you know what Nietzsche meant. This is the myth of the good victim, the belief that suffering equals virtue, that to be wounded is to be wise, and that if you've been hurt, you're now beyond critique. It's dangerous because it's so seductive. It cloaks itself in compassion, but its roots are in resentment, and slowly, it trains a culture to apologize for strength and elevate the powerless, not to help them rise, but to keep the powerful down. We see this myth at work every day. The person who criticizes you then hides behind, "I've just been going through a lot." The one who collapses into performative fragility the moment they're challenged, flipping the narrative from aggressor to victim. This isn't vulnerability, it's control. And Nietzsche called it out over 100 years ago. He didn't want a world ruled by pity, because pity, when used this way, doesn't heal, it paralyzes. Here's what he feared. When suffering becomes currency, the marketplace of ideas collapses. When every honest truth is seen as violence, conversation dies. And when we treat hurt feelings as a higher authority than clear thinking, we end up with a world where no one dares to speak at all. But what's worse is what happens inside us. If you've ever second-guessed your own courage, your own clarity, your own fire, just to stay likable or palatable or safe, then you've tasted this decay. It starts as hesitation, then turns into silence, and finally becomes self-betrayal. That's how the spirit rots, quietly, softly, with a smile. And Nietzsche's answer? Don't soften, don't shrink, don't become small just because others are afraid of your size. Rise, even if it makes people uncomfortable. Speak, even if your voice shakes. Tell the truth, especially when the truth burns. Because what's at stake isn't just your voice. It's the very idea that strength can still exist without apology. So where does all this leave us? After we've torn through the lies dressed as virtues, after we've peeled back the masks of false morality and seen the fear lurking underneath, what's left? Nietzsche didn't just want to destroy the old world. He wanted to build something in its place. Something harder, sharper, more honest. He called it self-overcoming. And no, it's not self-improvement. It's not 5 steps to a better morning or journaling your way into confidence. Self-overcoming is war, not with the world, but with yourself. It's looking directly into your pain, your rage, your fear, and refusing to be ruled by it. It's becoming the person you were meant to be before the world told you to tone it down. To Nietzsche, the highest form of strength wasn't dominating others. It was creating from the chaos inside yourself. He wasn't interested in discipline for the sake of control, but for the sake of creation. And he believed that the Übermensch, the one who transcends, is not a tyrant, but a builder of new values. Someone who doesn't beg for meaning from religion, politics, or culture, but generates meaning from within. Let that sink in. We're trained from birth to look outward for instruction, fit in, follow the rules, play nice. And if you're in pain, don't worry, someone else will fix it for you. Just don't rock the boat. But Nietzsche, he wanted you to rock the whole damn ocean. He believed the future belongs not to the obedient, but to the defiant, not to the cautious, but to the courageous, and not to those who beg for protection, but to those who dare to protect their own integrity, even if it costs them everything. That's the paradox. True strength often looks like solitude, like walking away from the crowd, like building in silence while everyone else is shouting for attention. The world may not celebrate you for it, not at first, but you don't need their applause. You need your own respect. Think of the climber who doesn't curse the mountain but thanks it, because without the climb, there is no transformation. Without resistance, there is no revelation. Nietzsche didn't offer comfort, he offered clarity. And that's the gift, the brutal, beautiful gift. You don't need to be liked, you need to be real. You don't need pity, you need purpose. And you don't need permission to rise, just the courage to begin. So what now? Now you face the question that's been hunting you all along. Not can I be strong, but am I ready to stop being weak? Not will the world change, but will I change in spite of the world? That's where Nietzsche leaves us, on the edge of ourselves, staring into the abyss and realizing it was never there to swallow us. It was there to sharpen us. And once you've seen that, you can't unsee it. If something in this message stirred you, good. Let it. Let it sit. Let it challenge you. Maybe for the first time, you're not trying to soothe the discomfort, but walk into it. That's where the work begins. Now I want to hear from you. What did this awaken in you? What beliefs do you see now, clearly, maybe painfully, that have been holding you back? Drop it in the comments, even if it's messy, especially if it's messy. And if you're not ready to share, that's fine too. But don't just move on to the next dopamine hit. Sit with it, reflect, write, wrestle. And here's a simple but powerful practice. For the next 24 hours, catch every moment you shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable. Every time you downplay your idea, hesitate to speak truth, or pretend to be less than you are. Just notice. No judgment, just awareness. That's where freedom starts. Not by changing everything overnight, but by finally paying attention. If you're ready to go deeper into this kind of raw psychological excavation, subscribe. Because here we don't do soft answers. We do the hard questions that actually lead somewhere. See you in the next one. And remember, real power doesn't apologize for being awake.